suspicion was clearly that the house was being devalued because of the homeowner's race. And so, I understood that I was standing in to be a white homeowner to see if that had any impact on the appraisal value. And so the house had to look like it was actually my house. And maybe some of your home furnishings don't look like they do in my house. So, the appraiser showed up at the door, and I assumed that I was Tanisha. And she looked, and every once in a while she would ask a question, and I would text Tanisha, like, are the countertops quartz, or what material is that? I was trying to answer the questions as if I lived here.
The Austins' experiment of whitewashing their home worked. With Jan sitting in, a new appraiser selected more valuable homes as comparable properties to the Austins.
So it appraised for 1.482, 50% more than what it appraised for by a couple weeks prior.
Almost 1.5, $500,000 more.
We knew that the appraisal wasn't what it should have been, but that magnitude of difference.
She was like, that's over 50%. Like, your house increased over 50% with me standing in for you 3 weeks later. To put it in that term was like, whoa.
There was no victory or, celebration over that number. As a white person, I might get a low appraisal that I disagree with, that I think used the wrong comps, but I'll never suspect that I got that low appraisal because of the color of my skin.
I'm so looking forward to this. You didn't think I was going to even be able to... I didn't think I was going to be able to handle it.
I feel like you're in a reality TV show.
I want to ask you about the erasure that you all had to perform in taking down your artwork, your family photos. Even though, at the end of the day, it was mission accomplished because you got the higher appraised value.
It was humiliating, right? For somebody to have to change who they are, essentially, and be like, oh, well, we're going to make sure that we take everything and put it in storage. I'm talking about we going through our kids' rooms, taking stuff down. My wife went through her bathroom, get rid of her hair products, all of our books and our art to make sure that we removed everything. And then we had to come back and put it all back in, right? Like, we had to literally move back into our home with our belongings again.
It's hard to take down who you are because you're not sure if who you are is good enough.
What the lady saw was the color of our skin. What the lady saw was our home being here in Marin City. And so she comes in with her own lens and was like, well, this is what I feel their life is worth.
This is not about just Tanisha and Paul Austin versus the appraisal industry. This is about millions of people and generations of people who have been impacted by a system that was not fair.
At Chevy, the holidays mean going places and doing things you love to do with friends and family. Visit your local Chevy dealer, and when you find your red tag, you find your deal. Then make the most of your time with the people who matter.
For someone to lowball you, it is not the give and take. It's not a back and forth. It is, you're challenging my intelligence. When you watch movies, I will quote movies. Like, if I like a good movie, I will watch it.
What's your most quoted movie?
Lately, because of everything that I'm dealing with personally, professionally, just everything. Color Purple.
Oof. All my life I had to fight.
All my life I had to fight. I'm even putting it in emojis on every social media platform. You know, every weekend, this park is just filled with people, filled with families.
And you have prime access to that from your home.
Yeah. Right on the other side of this, there's a huge tech development called 16 Tech. So it's kind of like a hub for tech startups.
So you have a tech startup. You have
Yes.
a major university right here, research, medical university.
Yeah, major hospitals.
10 minutes from downtown.
Not even
Still.
10 minutes, because I get to work in about 7. Look.
That might be because of speeding. But still so close to the heart of everything.
Yes.
I got what you want, I got what you want, I got what you want.
Tell us a little bit about the historic nature of this neighborhood and the Flander House homes.
When this neighborhood was created, those in government at that time said it wouldn't last 50 years. And here we are 70 plus years strong. 185 families that built these homes. And they have pride in that history of living in a place that is so rich, despite all of the barriers that were put in place for it, despite the fact that it was a throwaway idea to say, oh, just give them the land over by the dump. And they turned it into a diamond. And now folks want to take the diamond away.
For Carlette Duffy, that diamond is this home she purchased to be closer to family.
Yes, so good to finally meet you.
From the day Carlette moved in, she had a big plan to one day purchase her grandmother's house just a few doors down from her.
I just adore this picture. So this is my mom, and this is the family house.
A house where she spent so much of her childhood.
Isn't she gorgeous?
She is adorable.
My baby.
With the goal of one day passing it on to her child.
My sister had an appraisal done on her home, and that appraisal came back at 198.
It's important to know that Carlette's sister Tempe lives next door to her, literally the next home over.
If I could get my home appraised close to that, I would be able to pull the equity out to then do a cash purchase of my grandmother's home. And so if hers came in at 189, then I would think mine should come in very close to that. But it came in at 125, which was surprising to me. What he valued my home at was not going to allow me to do what I needed to do.
At that point, the loan was dead. Carlette was unable to prove she had enough equity in her home to take out the cash to purchase her grandmother's property.
I said, I'm ready to fight. Whatever it takes to fight, let's do it. Because this cannot continue. Cannot.
This time, she took a page from a now familiar playbook.
I went through the work of whitewashing my home. What in my house is a black person lives here? Removing everything that represented me, my family, my culture, everything. I have my Asian-inspired pieces that replaced my African-inspired pieces. I met with some of my girlfriends. One's black, one's white, both married to white men. And I was like, can I borrow one of y'all's husbands? My friend Brooke, her husband Hank was like, of course I'll do it. I told him, I said, I just need you to be my brother.
You think it's an algorithm that's not based on anything, but then, you go through something like this and you realize, how much subjectivity there must be there.
In a couple of days, I got the appraisal report back.
And what was that value?
$259. $259.
That's more than double the original appraised amount of Carlette's home.
It just hits me, just in that short amount of time, that I was right. And that it was me. The only thing bringing down the value of my home was me. That this is a system that's telling me that I devalue my home. That when there is a white male here to speak on behalf of what they believe is a white female, it's better than having me here.
that's what hurts. It's like, what is so terrible about me that it takes value?
I was really sad when, she echoed the sentiment of, am I what's wrong with my house? Like, I don't ever have to feel like that, like ever.
White privilege, if you need an example, because many of our people do need an example of white privilege, and you being here just is, you didn't have to do anything but literally be here as a white person.
Carlisle Duffy did what so many fair housing groups across the country do in conducting what's called a fair housing test. She just did it for herself. And out of that, her story went viral. And so many people then started contacting us from across the country about their own experiences. And since that time, we've had a number of other individuals contact us, and we have a number of investigations that are pending. The bias and discrimination is so baked into our housing process, we haven't been able to properly address it. So I think for a lot of people, they felt that if they spoke up, their voices simply wouldn't be heard. They wouldn't be believed, or anything would be done about it either.
And one of my favorite lines that is related to all of this, "Oh, brother, where art thou?" I love that movie. You ain't no kind of man if you don't own land. That is real.
Hazardous. They're closer to industries, recycling plants, things of that nature. And all of this determine where banks would loan money to for mortgage loans for folks to live. So how is it that these maps that were outlawed half a century ago with the passage of the Fair Housing Act of 1968 are still affecting the appraised home value in your neighborhood today?
People in black communities can look down the street and see the price difference. They can see development occurring in their communities. And they're working hard. They're doing everything they're told to live the American dream, and they just can't get the value. They're not reaping the rewards.
If you think that black people are not being discriminated against when their property is being appraised, if you think they're not being discriminated against, kindly raise your hand. Okay, hands now. We're getting some consternation, I see.
My work puts numbers on the things that people have been saying for centuries.
We examine homes of similar quality in analogous neighborhoods with the exception of racial demographics to make an apples-to-apples comparison between black and white neighborhoods. What we found astounds.
After accounting for education, crime, walkability, all those fancy Zillow metrics, we found that homes in black neighborhoods are underpriced by about 23%, about $48,000 per home. Cumulatively, there's about $156 billion in lost equity around the country.
Racial bias reflected in the pricing and price is robbing money that people can use to uplift communities.
And we know that that's the money people use to lift themselves up by the proverbial bootstraps, to send their kids to college, to start a business, to move into a better neighborhood. And so when we found that finding in 2018, it made a lot of waves. It's caused a reckoning in the real estate industry. People started doing their own experiments. They started, quote unquote, whitewashing their homes, removing all the black artifacts, the books, the hair products, and then getting a white stand-in to get a second appraisal. And when that happened, many families found they got a higher appraisal. It's sort of exposing sort of the intrinsic value of whiteness.
You know that black families have been doing this for generations. They knew intuitively to do it. Why? Because it's something we've been doing for generation after generation after generation.
Differences in home and neighborhood quality do not fully explain price difference.
There are a lot of ways to kill people. You can kill them physically, like you kill Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. And then it's killing the dreams, the American dream of home ownership, this notion of trying to leave my children something that we can say, my mother, my father left something for us to continue to try to build upon the American dream. It is just ridiculous that a white couple picture on the wall will have the house valued at $500,000 more than black people picture on the wall. The house is the house. The appraiser is the appraisal. Why would you go through such ridiculous lengths to belittle black people and devalue them and marginalize them?
There is discrimination. The housing market was predicated on suppressing black prices in particular areas.
One of the things that we're seeing is the continued perpetuation of the systemic association between race and risk and race and value. The data upon which those maps were based were generated from the residential security surveys that were completed by real estate professionals, real estate agents, and appraisers that were hired by the federal government to fan out across the country and essentially grade communities, grade neighborhoods. What the federal government wanted to know was, are there any black people in this particular area? The reason you want to know whether or not there are any black people in a neighborhood is because that is going to determine the value. Now, I haven't looked at every single residential security survey. I haven't. There are thousands of them. But every single one I've looked at, if there are any black people in the area, it's graded the worst grade. It's designated as a hazardous area. It's given the red color coding. It's the systemic, institutionalized association between race and risk.
Racial residential segregation and the housing market more broadly are at the root of pretty much every form of systemic racial inequality in American society. What happens is that real estate actors, politicians, people who are buying and selling homes make decisions using segregation as a tool to uphold a particular system. And in our country, that system is white supremacy. What we have in housing markets across the country is the use of segregation to determine how much homes are valued, something that people like appraisers, mortgage bankers, real estate developers, and real estate agents use to further enrich white people in white neighborhoods. That's one of the driving inequalities, is the hypervaluation of homes in white neighborhoods compared to their relative devaluation or undervaluation of homes in Black and Latinx neighborhoods in particular.
More than 50% of the neighborhood is black people, and the property values are similar to other neighborhoods. Property is similar, but the values are not. Do you think there's discrimination involved in this devaluation of that property? If so, raise your hand. One hand.
I can't believe they're saying this, because for most of American history, it was legal to segregate. The Fair Housing Act is 67. I mean, it's only a relatively recent phenomenon when it wasn't illegal to segregate. It was a simple act of acknowledging, there is a problem. And it's so symbolic of American society now. All we're saying, acknowledge so we can correct.
The appraisal industry is an older workforce. It is predominantly white male. You already know, these are people who were raised, they were trained in the field to say that race matters. Communities of color are devalued. That's how they were trained professionally. And these are the same appraisers who are making decisions today. So they're bringing all of those biases with them when they are making their decisions, even if it's subjective, right? Even if it's not conscious, those biases are still coming with them. The appraisal industry is not diverse at all. In fact, it's very homogenous. It's overwhelmingly white male. One analysis showed that when it comes to the appraisal industry, 96% are white and just 4% are people of color. That's a huge disparity. It looks nothing like what America is.
Those statistics are mind-blowing. So what's being done to make the industry more diverse? That's just one of the big questions Jody Bishop and the Appraisal Institute are trying to answer. Bishop's group is the largest professional appraisal organization in the country with more than 16,000 members who have more in common than just their profession.
The appraisal profession should mirror the faces of the communities we work in. And certainly there's a lot of work in the area of diversity that we have started years ago, and we are continuing now with our efforts. And we can always get better, and we should never stop trying to diversify the profession.
We found out that appraisers definitely are not shy when it comes to sharing their views about the race of the folks that live in the neighborhoods that they're appraising.
We're talking about comments appraisers made in private Facebook groups with thousands of members each. One of the members shared screenshots with us.
So these groups date back many years. I'm looking at a comment right here from 2016. It says, whose brilliant idea was it to schedule 6 inspections in South Atlanta in the ghetto on Saturday morning? Whoever it was, they need to be fired. This one says, don't make eye contact with the natives, and I hope you're wearing the right colors, whatever that means. Another guy writes under that comment, says, dang man, I usually make sure I do my hood inspections before 11 a.m. The boy's still sleeping, so I don't need to put a cap in their blank. Another guy writes, I can see it now. Breaking news. Shooting in the ghetto. Appraiser praised by neighbors for getting rid of 6 drug gang members hiding out in the empty house he went to appraise. And then that guy follows up with another comment because he had to beat the one he just commented before that. It says, wear a priest garb with a collar. Usually works except in the ISIS areas. Oops.
Let that sink in.
Again, these are people who are supposed to be coming into your neighborhood, literally into your home, and you expect them to give you a fair shake at an appraisal, an unbiased opinion. But how could their opinion be unbiased if they're saying things like this in these appraiser Facebook groups?
It's one thing to say that this is a certain characteristic of the neighborhood. To take that characteristic and penalize it possibly would be not the right thing to have happen. If there's an appraiser out there that absolutely says, I'm not going to go appraise in this neighborhood because it's
so many families and individuals, and the more that we are able to really highlight this issue, to educate the public in general about what is happening, the more we will be able to be successful in fixing the problem.
We sat down with the Housing and Urban Development Secretary, Marcia Fudge, who headed the effort, to ask her, is this enough?
I mean, you don't change people's hearts and minds overnight. But I think that over time, what we're doing is going to make a significant difference. Yes, I do believe that. People won't feel bad about living in communities that are communities like my community. The other thing it does that people don't understand is because in most cases, you look at property taxes that fund schools, most places. So if my schools are always underfunded because our homes are underfunded, we're never going to be able to catch up.
Looking at the lack of diversity in the field, some even characterize the appraiser profession as perhaps being the whitest profession in the United States. What does HUD plan to do about that?
It is, to me, almost unheard of that you would have an industry in this country today that affects so many people's lives that 95% are white. First thing we have to do is make sure that the profession becomes more diverse. Secondly, I think it is important that not only is there diversity, but there's some knowledge of the neighborhoods and communities that they're working in. They send people that have no idea where they are, but what they know is that that's a community that has been historically redlined, that's a community that's historically black, so if it's black, it's automatically less. I literally lived 2 houses from a white neighborhood. 2 houses.
A nicer lot, a larger lot.
Larger lot.
As you said, in your expert opinion, perhaps even a nicer home.
Correct.
And your home is valued for $25,000 less than 2 doors down from you.
Correct.
How does that happen to the HUD secretary?
You know, because I live in a black neighborhood. So my neighborhood is one that is automatically considered to be not as good as a neighborhood that starts 2 doors from me. There is a bias, an inherent bias, that the appraisals have had for generations. This just didn't start. And so when you go generation after generation with this mindset, the person coming in today doesn't change it. They just pick up what's already in front of them.
While the federal government works on solutions, state governments are taking action. From California, where a new law will require appraisers to take anti-bias training beginning in 2023, to Maryland, where a bill was introduced to create a task force to study the devaluation of communities of color. But the experts we spoke to are not sold, most all expressing reservations on if these initial commitments and solutions will lead to real change.
If we want to do more anti-bias training, awesome. If we want to diversify the industry, awesome. It should be. At the same time, like I've said, neither of those things actually address what's driving the growth in inequity between home values in white neighborhoods and home values in neighborhoods of color.
So many families across our country have been waiting for so long to get justice for what occurred to them. So I would like to see that get sped up, that we get a more, standardized process for when people feel that they've experienced discrimination and be able to move them through that process faster.
The housing industry in general have regulated itself for far too long. A lot of people are getting rich because of these practices. A lot of people are throttled in their growth by these practices, and we need to do some correction.
My bill, the Fair Appraisal and Inequity Reform Act of 2022, addresses appraisal bias and discrimination by establishing a new federal valuation agency responding to a key recommendation made by President Biden's Interagency Task Force on Property Appraisal and Valuation Equity.
Congress must address bias in the valuation process and the urgent need for reform.
We believe the appraisal process is sound. We do not believe appraisal bias is rampant, rather isolated.
I must note here that the draft Fair Appraisal and Inequity Reform Act of 2022 is deeply concerning. Rather than dismantling the system, we should be looking at ways to work collaboratively to address concerns about the federal government's role within the appraisal regulatory system without dismantling it.
As the representative from California, what is your take on so many of these families and their very personal stories that have been making national attention?
Surprisingly, I have been hearing these complaints for years. We find that discrimination is apparent in so many different ways. Well, I want to tell you, the appraisal industry is more than discriminatory. And, it creates the kind of atmosphere where blacks cannot, absolutely say that they own their own home.
I feel like so many families that I've interviewed and told their stories, they feel like they don't have recourse.
They really don't. As I worked with my staff, I said, let's identify where a homeowner can make a complaint and it get acted on. And they all stared at me and they looked at me and they could not answer me. And because we have responsibility in my committee, that's why I have the FAIR Act. And I'm going to make sure that we get the ability to regulate in ways that it has not been done.
One of the most notable things in there is removing the Appraisal Foundation, essentially as the overseers of the appraisal industry, and instead placing the Federal Valuation Agency in control of appraisals in this country. Why do you think that that should be a part of the solution?
I think it should be a part of the solution because there are a number of agencies that have some kind of responsibility for dealing with this whole appraisal industry. It should be one agency with clear criteria and rules that are understood, and we should regulate them better.
In the FAIR Act, one of the things that you
That's
point
right.
out is that if an appraiser is found guilty of discriminating on the instance
Yes.
of race, religion,
Yes.
et cetera, all these protected classes, that they should essentially be penalized for the difference in that appraisal amount. So if the appraisal was off for $250,000 or $500,000, in the case of the Austins and Marin City, that should be the reprimand for the appraisal.
Well,
Is
that
that
would
right?
certainly be a good deterrent. If you have to go into your pocket to pay the difference, that should be, the kind of regulation that would cease the kind of discrimination that we've been talking about. Let's see what happens.
It's not until you affect their wallet that they really change.
What I want to happen is for the industry to be put on notice. You cannot do this.
Well, hopefully we can push this forward and get damages and reparations, something that we haven't never got. We never got that step up like other folks.
Equity is stimulus. We need to start restoring the value, not just to help black people, but to help the country.
I think reparations could be a part of the solution because it would address historic acts of racism that has had a profound impact on today's generation.
Reparations is allowed